You are 17 years old. Your shoes have a hole in the left sole. Your mother works a double shift at a textile factory 6 days a week. You live in a neighborhood where the government is a rumor and the cartel is a fact. One morning, a man you've known your whole life hands you a small backpack. He doesn't explain what's inside. He doesn't have to. He gives you an address, a time, and 2 words. Don't look. You don't ask questions. You walk 12 blocks. You hand the bag to a stranger at a corner store. You go home. 3 hours later, the same man hands you the equivalent of what your mother makes in a week. That is the moment. That is the door. And once you walk through it, you don't walk back. Level 1, the Watcher El Halcón. You don't carry drugs. You don't carry weapons. You carry a cheap prepaid phone and a memorized list of license plates. Your job is to watch. You stand at the corner of a block that isn't yours and report everything. Police vehicles, rival faces, unmarked cars. You send codes a specific number of rings, a 1-word text, a missed call that means clear, another that means run. You earn somewhere between $200 and $400 a week, depending on the plaza. You know almost nothing about the organization you work for. You know your handler's first name, maybe not even his real one. You know the corner, you know the signal. That ignorance is by design. At this level, you are disposable. You are a sensor, a human tripwire. If something goes wrong, you absorb the consequence, and the machine replaces you within the week. You're not part of the cartel. You're furniture. Level 2, the transporter El Hormiga. A year passes, maybe 2. You've proven something: reliability, the ability to keep your mouth shut, an instinct for when things feel wrong before they become wrong. Now you move product. Not kilos, not yet, packages. Quantities small enough to deny, large enough to matter. You learn routes by heart, never by map. You memorize the shift changes of 3 different police precincts. You know which taxi drivers are on payroll and which aren't. You receive a 10% cut of the run value for every successful delivery. On a good week, that feels like real money. On a bad week, a checkpoint, a seizure, a rival crew at the wrong intersection, you understand for the first time what it means to owe a debt you didn't choose. This is called the deuda de sangre, the blood debt. You didn't sign a contract, but you signed something, and the organization remembers every word of it, even if you've already forgotten. Level 3, the street manager, El Cobrador. Now you collect. Every block in a controlled plaza operates on a tax system. Street vendors, small businesses, local dealers who aren't directly employed. Everyone pays weekly without negotiation. Your job is enforcement of those payments. You don't always use violence. In fact, the most effective collectors rarely do. Consistency is the product. The understanding that failure to pay produces a consequence, that certainty is the real weapon. You manage 4 to 6 sub-collectors beneath you. You receive their collections, take your percentage, typically 15% of what passes through your hands, and kick the rest up the chain. This is where you first learn the word that will define the rest of your career: arriba, up. Everything flows up. At this level, you are making real money. You are also, for the first time, genuinely responsible for other people's mistakes. If one of your collectors skims, that debt lands on you. If one of them talks, that problem is yours to solve. You are no longer furniture. You are a moving part, and moving parts can break. Level 4, the financial coordinator, El Contador de Plaza. This is where something shifts. You don't grab a weapon, you grab a spreadsheet. A plaza, a controlled territory, generates cash across dozens of revenue streams simultaneously. Drug sales, extortion, kidnapping, ransoms, pirated goods, illegal fuel. That cash arrives in physical form. Loose bills, rubber-banded stacks, gym bags left in parked cars. Your job is to count it, record it, and begin the first stage of making it disappear. You open accounts at 3 different regional banks under 3 different names. You structure deposits never more than the local reporting threshold. You use shell entities, a small construction firm, a car wash, a restaurant that serves 14 customers a day, but somehow generates $40,000 a month in declared revenue. You understand, at this level, that the cartel's real vulnerability isn't violence, it's accounting. Law enforcement can replace foot soldiers endlessly. What they cannot afford to follow is a competent paper trail, because a competent paper trail doesn't exist. Your value is invisibility. Your work is never found at a crime scene. Level 5, the white paper manager, 415, El de los Papeles. The term white paper fan comes from the triads, the 415 rank, named after the Chinese character for paper. In the cartel structure, this role has a different name, but an identical function. You are the architect of legitimacy. You manage a portfolio of legal businesses between 15 and 40, depending on the organization's scale. A logistics company that moves actual freight, which also moves product. A real estate holding group that acquires distressed properties, renovates them using cartel labor, sells them at market rate, and produces clean capital. You interface with actual lawyers, accountants, and notaries, most of whom don't ask questions because your fees are generous and your instructions are clear. You become fluent in offshore structures. You understand the difference between a nominee director and a beneficial owner. You know which Caribbean jurisdiction processes corporate registrations in 48 hours and which one has a tax treaty that complicates asset tracing. The money that leaves your desk is clean. Where it came from is a story no document will ever tell. Level 6, the regional logistics director. You no longer think in street level terms. You think in corridors. The movement of product from source to market is a supply chain problem indistinguishable in its complexity from the logistics networks of a multinational corporation. You manage warehousing points, transit routes, handoff schedules, and contingency plans when a primary corridor is compromised. You maintain relationships with commercial freight brokers, port officials, and customs agents across multiple countries. Some are on payroll. Some simply choose not to look too carefully. You run loss projections. If 12% of a shipment is seized at the border, that is not a catastrophe, that is a calculated operational cost built into the unit economics from the start. Your network moves product worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. You have never once touched any of it. Your fingerprints are nowhere. Your name appears on nothing. You are a ghost who runs an empire. Level 7, the diplomatic lieutenant L and Las. At this elevation, violence is a last resort and a sign of failure. Your role is negotiation. You maintain formal, structured relationships with rival organizations, government officials, military commanders, and in some cases, representatives of foreign intelligence services who find the cartel's reach strategically useful. You attend meetings in hotel conference rooms and private residences that would surprise you with their normality. Men in pressed shirts, coffee, a discussion of territorial boundaries framed almost entirely in the language of business, market share, distribution rights, non-compete arrangements. The cartel's continued existence depends less on firepower than on its diplomatic infrastructure. You are that infrastructure. You broker peace agreements. You negotiate the release of detained associates through intermediaries with access to prosecutors and judges. You manage the monthly payments to 3 governors, 2 federal ministers, and a rotating cast of law enforcement leadership. The figures involved are not small. A senior police commander receives the equivalent of $150,000 USD monthly. A federal official in a strategic position may receive 2 to 3 times that, plus assurances about the safety of his family, framed as generosity, but understood by both parties as something else entirely. This is not bribery in the crude sense. This is the maintenance of a parallel government. Level 8, the regional commander El Plaza boss. You control a territory, not a corner, not a block, a region potentially the size of a European country, where every economic activity of significance generates revenue for the organization, and where your word carries the weight of law. Your days are structured by security protocols. You never sleep in the same location twice in a row. Your movements are planned 48 hours in advance by a security detail whose loyalty has been tested in ways you don't discuss. You manage a personal financial portfolio worth tens of millions, distributed across multiple jurisdictions in asset classes your 20-year-old self would not have been able to name: real estate investment trusts, offshore discretionary trusts, equity holdings through nominee shareholders in Panama, Delaware, and the British Virgin Islands. You have a family. You have not had dinner with them at a restaurant in 4 years. Power at this level is a cage. It is gold-plated and immaculate. It is still a cage. Level 9, the CFO, El Financiero. The organization generates between $3 billion and $30 billion annually, depending on which cartel you represent. Your problem is not generating money. Your problem is that most of the world's financial infrastructure was designed eventually, imperfectly, but genuinely to make your money impossible to use. You operate a financial architecture of extraordinary sophistication. Bulk cash is moved physically across borders in commercial freight, declared as manufacturing equipment or agricultural product. It enters banking systems in jurisdictions with permissive oversight, is layered through a sequence of transactions across 4 to 6 countries, and re-enters the legitimate economy as investment, capital, real estate development, infrastructure projects, private equity stakes. You employ, directly or indirectly, a network of professional enablers, lawyers, accountants, bankers, real estate agents, and corporate service providers, most of whom operate at the comfortable edge of complicity, telling themselves they ask enough questions to maintain deniability. You have studied every major financial enforcement action of the last 30 years. You know where those operations succeeded. More importantly, you know where they failed. Level 10, the supreme boss, El Señor. You wake up. You do not know what city you are in. You know the room you've memorized, the exits, the sight lines, the location of the nearest vehicle. This is not paranoia. This is routine. Paranoia is a luxury of people who are not actually being hunted. You have no phone number anyone outside this room possesses. You have not been photographed in 11 years. You command an organization with more annual revenue than the GDP of some nations. You employ, directly and indirectly, hundreds of thousands of people. You have influenced elections, destabilized governments, and shaped the urban landscape of cities you have never visited. You have everything. You move like a man who owns nothing, because everything you have exists in the space between a government's inability to find you and your organization's willingness to protect you, and both of those conditions are temporary. You know this. You have always known this. Every man who held this position before you is either dead or in a cell. You told yourself you would be different. Every man who held this position told himself the same thing. 10 levels, 1 trajectory, from a backpack on a street corner to an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. From memorizing license plates to managing a financial architecture that employs actual bankers, actual lawyers, and actual politicians. The cartel is not a gang. It is a corporation with a supply chain, a financial division, a diplomatic corps, and a human resources model based entirely on coercion and elimination. It generates wealth on a scale that rivals sovereign states. And like every empire built on extracted value and enforced silence, it carries within its own structure the certainty of its collapse. The ledger always balances. The only question is who pays the final entry.